to share with you first a statement by the anthropologist Carl Lorenz about intuition. And I think it's a very beautiful statement. Since it is by a scientist, there are many such statements by a variety of scientists, but I think this is particularly apropos to what we've been talking about as a mode of knowing. He has said that intuition is generally regarded as a prerogative of artists and poets. I would assert, he adds, that it plays an indispensable role in all human recognition, even in the most disciplined forms of inductive research. Though in the latter, that is, in such research, the important part taken by intuition is very frequently overlooked. No important scientific fact has ever been proved that had not previously been simply and immediately seen by intuitive perception. It's an incredible statement by a scientist. Intuition it was when Kepler first perceived in the complicated epicycles of the planet's apparent movements the simple regularity of their real orbits, or when Darwin first saw in the intricate tangle of living and extinct forms of life the convincingly clear gestalt of the genealogical tree. Without intuition, the world would present to us nothing but an impenetrable and chaotic tangle of unconnected facts. It would be quite impossible for us to find the laws and regularities prevailing in this apparent chaos if the mathematical and statistical operations of our conscious mind were all that we had at our disposal. It is here that the unconsciously working computer of our gestalt perception is distinctly superior to all consciously performed computations. This superiority is due to the fact that intuition, like other highly developed, highly differentiated types of perception, is able to draw into simultaneous consideration a far greater number of premises than any of our conscious conclusions. It is the practically unlimited capacity for taking in relevant details and leaving out the irrelevant ones which makes the computer of this highest form of perception so immensely sensitive an organ. The most important advantage of intuition is that it is seeing in the deepest sense of the word. Like other kinds of perception, and unlike inductive research, it does not only find what is expected, but the totally unexpected as well. So I think that's the key, really, is that it's not just the expected, but the totally unexpected that can occur to us. I always recall the experience of a scientist friend of mine, a member of the society, one of my predecessors as director of the Crotone Institute School of Theosophy, Dr. Alfred Taylor, who was a scientist, a biologist at the University of Texas during his working career. And he applied for a grant on one occasion for some research in which he was involved. And at the end of the grant proposal, there was the question, what do you believe will be the result of your research? And he wrote in, if I knew, I would not be undertaking the research. And I think very often we must approach things that way. Well, I want to talk a bit this morning about, yes.
Do you have the source of Lorenz's quote?
Yes, it's in a book called Aspects of Form.
Aspects of Form.
Edited by L.L. White, W-H-Y-T-E. It's a whole series of essays by noted scientists on aspects of form. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I want to talk a little bit this morning about some ways of knowing as they occur in some of the various other traditions, and then engage you in some exercises today, including dialogue. Now, according to the Celtic tradition, which happens to be one of my favorite traditions, there are three different ways of knowing the universe, each one increasing in intimacy until the boundaries between subject and object no longer exist. So the first way, according to the Celtic tradition, is the familiar position where we know nature as perceiver to perceived, both separate, discrete entities. You can look at a tree, the tree is there and I am here, and we're very separate. And the only relationship is that I perceive that there is a tree there and I can label it and I see it and know it's there. This is the very familiar position. We walk through the world perceiving the objects of the world. We make sense of them. We don't drive into trees, if trees happen to be in the middle of the road. And in Ojai they can be, I might tell you, because we preserve our trees, and rather the road can go around the tree rather than taking the tree down for the road. So you'll find many streets in Ojai where you just drive around the tree. This is what we think of trees in California. So, but it's there, you see. The second, less common apprehension of the world can be called knowledge by communion, where the perceiver begins to assume the identity of the perceived. Boundaries begin to blur. There's a communion. Have you ever hugged a tree? When did you last hug a tree? Wonderful, isn't it? Isn't it marvelous? It's a wonderful experience. Go out and hug a tree sometime. And there's a communion with the tree. Remember, many years ago, we have a summer camp up in the high Sierras. That is the Theosophical Society, or one of our groups, has a camp up in the high Sierras, known as Far Horizons. And of course, on the property, there are many of the beautiful old redwood trees, these magnificent trees of California, beautiful trees. And then there is a special redwood grove to which we often go. And we had a picnic down in the redwood grove along the stream. And then the person who was conducting the group work that day said, each of you find a tree and just stand by the tree or sit by the tree and get the feel of the tree, commune with the tree. Well, it was quite incredible. There was one very huge old redwood, huge. We discovered later that 6 of us had been around that tree, and when none of us saw each other. That's how large it was, of course. And recounting the experiences, one person said, I wanted to go to that tree, but this tree pulled me. And this member who was leading the group said, yes, that's one of the most selfish trees in the grove. It needs human companionship and is always pulling people towards it. Another little story about trees. Some of you know of Dora van Gelder Kunz. That Dora has been a clairvoyant since birth, was trained by C.W. Leadbeater, and a very remarkable person Dora is. She's still running around like an 18-year-old, although she's 95 years old now, and she's very much involved in healing work. She's one who developed a mode of healing known as therapeutic touch, she and her colleagues. And she teaches this still. And on one occasion at one of our other summer camps, the American section has 3 major summer camps. And this one in the northeast, Pumpkin Hollow Farm, Dora and her late husband Fritz, were founders of it, as they were of our northwest summer camp. Anyway, we were sitting around and the children said to Dora, "Tell us about the tree spirits." And so Dora said, "Well, it's interesting. The tree spirits work all day. At night they gossip." We want to know what the tree spirits do at night. According to Dora, they gossip. Interesting. Anyway, this second form of knowing is by communion. Can we really understand, commune with the world? The third, of course, is when a kind of symbiosis takes place in which the human and other sentient forms are interchangeable. And this, of course, is the basis of many myths in the Celtic tradition and in some other traditions, a process of metamorphosis. We can call it knowing through transformation. This is the kind of living in the skins of other sentient beings. The great bards of the Celtic tradition, Taliesin, for example, attained the wisdom of a self that identifies not with form, but with the consciousness, a fluid consciousness, so that he could assume the shape of an eagle, or a porpoise, or a bear, or any other animal form, and be that consciousness. And there are many myths about that, you may know, of taking on the form. Now, the Greek myths of metamorphosis. So, in which there is a real symbiosis, a transformation that takes place. And I think often if we could really live in the skins, as it were, of other sentient beings, what would it be like to live in the skin of a Kosovo refugee?
Have you come across those books, The Animorphs?
Hmm?
Have you come across those books about the Animorphs?
Yes, yes, that's right, Ray. All the books about the animals, that really they're marvelous, and they're fascinating. Well, I think this is one of the great traditions, the Celtic tradition. And it's learning to speak the language of the soul. Now, don't get uptight that the animal form isn't an individual soul and so on. But there is the animal monad, the vegetable monad, the mineral monad. HPV writes about these, you know. And so what is it to contact that life, which is therefore occupying forms that are not yet human? interesting. And of course, this is part then of the caring of our own souls. Thomas Moore, who writes and lectures on archetypal psychology, who lived for many years as a monk in a Catholic order, interestingly enough, has degrees in theology, musicology, and philosophy. In his book, Care of the Soul, I don't know whether you've seen the book or you may have it. Ray, has it come in? I think it must have come in the bookshop sometime.
Yes, I've seen it in New Zealand.
Yeah.
I've seen it here.
Mm-hmm. He has said, one of the central difficulties involved in embarking on care of the soul is grasping the nature of the soul's discourse. The intellect works with reasons, logic, analysis, research, equations, pros and cons. But the soul practices a different kind of math and logic. It presents images that are not immediately intelligible to the reasoning mind. It insinuates, offers fleeting impressions, persuades more with desire than with reasonableness. And so he tells two Sufi stories. As you can tell from yesterday, I enjoy stories, so I thought I'd tell his two stories. The Sufi tradition has many stories, and they are really designed to awaken us, to awaken some other faculty than reason, than logic. The first is one of the famous Nasruddin stories, Nasruddin being the Sufi wise man who's a kind of fool. And so, now don't put her over there because that's not where Peter wants her, I can tell you that. These people that say you have to sit certain places because these schemes. Get ourselves all set up here. Leaves you exposed, Tarleton. You thought I wouldn't call on you.
Just what I was trying to avoid.
Don't worry. I don't know how many of you like the Nasruddin stories, but I love them. And of course, this is the story of Nasruddin, who received a violin on one occasion. And so he went to a teacher for music lessons. The logical things, to learn to play the violin. And his first question, as I'm sure all of us would do, is, how much do the lessons cost? And the music teacher said, $15 for the first lesson, and $10 for each lesson after that. Ah, said Nasruddin, that's fine. I'll begin with lesson number 2. Well, the other story is a little bit longer, and maybe not quite as humorous, but very interesting. Now, why do we laugh with that one of Nasruddin? Why do we laugh?
Because we identify with it.
Hmm? We identify with it. We identify with it. But it catches us unawares in a way that's unexpected somehow. You wonder what Nasruddin is going to say. It's sort of the unknown, the unexpected. The other story is about Nuri Bey, a reflected and respected Albanian who married a wife much younger than himself, a very beautiful woman. And one evening, when he returned home earlier than usual, his faithful servant came to him and said, your wife, our mistress, is acting very suspiciously. She's in her apartment with a huge chest, large enough to hold a man, which the chest belonged to your grandmother. And it really should only contain a few ancient embroideries, but I think there may be something much more in it right now, because she won't allow me or anybody to even look inside. So Nuri went to his wife's room, found her sitting disconsolate beside this massive wooden chest. And he said to her, "My dear, will you show me what's in that chest?" And she said, "Because of the suspicion of the servant, or because you don't trust me?" Well, he said, "Wouldn't it be just easier to open it and not think about undertones and overtones and whether there's trust or not? Just open it." And she said, I just don't think that's possible." And so he said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "It's locked." He said, "Well, where's the key?" So she holds up the key to him. And she says, "If you dismiss that servant, I'll give you the key." So the servant is dismissed. And the woman hands over the key and withdraws, obviously very troubled. Nuri Bey thinks for a long time, considers it. And then he calls in 4 gardeners from the estate and has them carry the chest unopened during the night to a distant part of the grounds, buries it. The matter is never again discussed between Nuri Bey and his wife. Now, where does that leave you? That's the story. So, perhaps spiritual knowing is more a matter of unknowing than knowing. Just going to leave the story. The most intimate degree of knowing takes form quietly when we observe the world and contemplate ordinary events. I think we need to become apprentices to each other. Do we trust each other? Do we trust ourselves in our own knowing? And then, of course, there's the Hermetic and the Pythagorean traditions. And we are in that tradition, theosophically. The need for a certain kind of knowledge, which is called gnosis, Gnosis, knowledge of the divine, which often arises from contradictions that are meaningful. Gnosis. Gnosis, I think, can be called primal knowledge, which is awakening to the knowledge that there is one ultimate truth, an awakening which is the highest essence of human life. Primal knowledge, it may be said, is inscribed in the fabric of our being, present within us, awaiting activation. There's a marvelous statement in the Mahatma letters that at the beginning of every cycle, every planetary chain, the beginning of every Manvantara, one might even say, there is impressed on the fabric, as it were, of the consciousness that is to be developed in that stage, the primary truths, the ultimate truths. It's a wonderful statement. I don't have it here in front of me, but you can look it up. It's a marvelous statement. There is impressed on the consciousness to be awakened ultimate truth, truth to be known, been called our original face. And it's that knowing, primal knowing, which transforms us. For Socrates, for example, to gain that primal knowledge, one must cultivate the soul, for it is inscribed in the soul, but has been lost or repressed or forgotten. And so the primary task of our existence is to remember, to retrieve that knowledge, to really come to know it. For Plato, of course, the source is a supreme primal form, an archetype. In the Dogon tradition of Africa, the primal force is called Nomo, N-O-M-M-O, the original word out of which all names and realities issued. Primal knowledge is expressed in primal living then, living in a sacred awareness. It is known as the Tao in China, Japan, which saturates existence with the energy of knowledge. The primal Aum, or Om, in the Mandukya Upanishad, all this world is the syllable Om. According to the Vedic philosophy of creation, the universe, the creation of which begins with the vibration of the primal energy, has a sound symbol. And that sound symbol is Om. No object can be thought of without the help of its sound symbol. And so, in the Vedic philosophy, the relation between Shabda, sound, and Artha, the object, is considered inseparable. And in the Kashmir Shaivite tradition, which Dr. Taimni was the chief exponent in our theosophical history, in the Shiva Sutras, there is a very brief little mantra, there's a brief sutra, very brief sutra, 2 words in Sanskrit, 2 words in Sanskrit. It's a marvelous sutra. Both Dr. Taimni and another wonderful member in India, Jayadev Singh, commented on it at great length, but it's a very interesting one. Chittam mantra. Chittam mantra. That's all there is to it. Chittam. The knowing, the cognizer, the knowingness. Chit, to know. This is one of the qualities, if you like, of the primordial one. Chit. Sat chit ananda. Chit. Chittam. The knowing. The knowing. The knowing is mantra, is sound, reverberating. And that mantra, the primary mantra, Om. This is the creative, and when that resounds in your knowing, you have absolute knowing. This is enlightenment, if you like. The sacred symbol that generates all things, sustains all things, ultimately destroys all things. According to Professor Ashok Gangadine, who is professor of philosophy at Haverford College in Pennsylvania, there are 2 ways of knowing and 2 kinds of knowledge. Egocentric knowing eclipses primal knowledge and is lodged in a chronic pattern of fragmentation and dualism. Cannot process the infinite structure of the unified field. In contrast, the quest for primal knowledge breaks down barriers and crosses into the play of Logos. The awakening of primal knowledge involves nothing less than the awakening of our being and participation in true knowledge. So that primal knowledge, Chittam mantra. This is that chitta which ponders over the highest reality. Consciousness focused through the cognizing instrument, which is the mind. Dr. Timney puts it, all the different states of mind, thoughts, and ideas are essentially motions, harmonic or otherwise. And so this bringing one's mind into that reverberating, harmonious state in which it is mantra. Mantram, of course, as I say, is a term not easily defined, used a great deal. Everybody seems to have a mantra, you know. Mr. Krishnamurti once said you might just as well be saying Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola. It seems to be part of the modern mantra civilization. Fundamentally, it refers, of course, to a formula, we call it a formula, consisting of a word or a set of words addressed to a deity, and can mean that mental awareness by which one feels one's identity with the highest reality. Dr. Jayadeva Singh, remarkable member in India who has since died and who has translated some of the classical texts of Kashmir Shaivism also, has put it, thus becoming identical with that reality, the mind itself becomes mantra. Isn't that a marvelous statement? So, becoming identical with that highest reality, the mind itself becomes mantra. And he puts it further, the divine, supreme I consciousness. This is the ahamkara, the possibility within universal consciousness to focus as an I consciousness, he says, is the dynamo of all the mantras. This is the fundamental one. And Dr. Timney, in his little work, The Ultimate Reality and Realization, commenting on this sutra, this is the key. This is the key to all of our knowing, isn't it? Chittam mantra. Commenting on this sutra, quotes a verse from one of the Hindu texts. O Divine Mother, of mantras you are the vibrational sound basis. In the case of sounds, you are the different kinds of knowledge related to those sounds. In the case of these different forms of knowledge, you are the different aspects of consciousness from which those different forms of knowledge are derived. And it is only through your power that the great void of the Absolute, in which all things in the manifest and the unmanifest are present in a perfectly harmonized form, can be perceived. So this is that original Om. HPB in her Esoteric Instructions, in the Collected Writings, Volume 12, discusses this Om and the invocation, that wonderful invocation, Om Mani Padme Hum, and says, in this, the most sacred of all Eastern formulas, not only has every syllable a secret potency producing a definite result, but the whole invocation has 7 different meanings and can produce 7 distinct results, each of which may differ from the others. The mystic sentence, Om Mane Padme Hum, when rightly understood, contains a reference to the indissoluble union between man and the universe, rendered in 7 different ways, and having the capability of 7 different applications to as many planes of thought and action. From whatever aspect we examine it, it means, I am that I am. I am in thee, and thou art in me. Chittam mantra. So if you remember nothing else, to bring the mind into that harmonic, and it's the harmony, it's the harmonic, which is the right proportion of sounds. Hugh, what is a harmonic?
Every sound is a cloud, like a spectrum.
Like a spectrum.
Yes.
Yes. So
And it goes on to infinity.
So it goes on for infinity.
We only hear a certain range of it
Yes.
in music.
So if we could hear the full range of it, this would be the logoic consciousness.
I presume.
One presumes. So it's like the spectrum, isn't it? So and it awakens. So what is the sound of the self? So, well, one could look at other traditions. Our time is going. Let me just share with you a brief poem of Rumi, great Sufi poet. There is a kind of knowing that is a love, not a scholarly knowing. That minutiae collecting doesn't open you. It inflates you like a beard or a fine turban. This other knowing love is a rising light, a happiness for both worlds. The eminence you think you want, the power over others, let all that go. It is better not to ride on other people's backs. That is how we arrive at the grave. Tend to just that which is yours. Don't ask someone else to do your work. Ask within. And when that presence directs you, whatever you do will be right, even though externally it seems to be wrong. There's no way ever to say how we are with phenomena. Don't be fooled again. It's Rumi. Well, what I want to do, and there's much more I talk about, this is sort of bits and pieces that I thought I'd share this morning. But I want to, after we've had our break, when we come back, I would like to try the mode of knowing through dialogue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it now, and then whatever time I end up, we'll have the break. I hope that doesn't disturb people too much. Maybe before or after 10:30. It's a movable feast, isn't it? You can go ahead and take all the pictures you want. Some of you may be familiar with dialogue. I'm sure you are. I know Hazel is, and probably some others are familiar with it. But I want to try a little experiment, and I hope it will work. At least we're going to try it. David Bohm, who, of course, has done a great deal with, did a great deal with Mr. Krishnamurti in dialogue. We have many of the dialogues. David Bohm has said that it is clear that if we are to live in harmony with ourselves and with nature, we need to be able to communicate freely in a creative movement in which no one permanently holds to or otherwise defends his own ideas. And of course, then he asks, why then is it so difficult to actually bring about such communication? But this is the heart of dialogue. It's a creative movement. And we're going to try it first. We're going to choose a partner, 2 people, and I will give you a sentence which you're going to inquire into, because dialogue is really a form of collective self-inquiry in which participants are committed to explicitly understanding the hidden assumptions that are present. Examine how perceptions and assumptions affect our individual and collective action. Bohm uses the metaphor of a stream that is being polluted near its source. Downstream, there's the effort to remove the pollution without tackling the cause at the source. So he suggests that our thinking has become polluted. There exists a systematic flaw in the human thought process, which consists of mostly unconscious assumptions. And that unless we can examine those assumptions, the thinking process continues to be flawed. So, is it possible to examine our unconscious assumptions? You see, we assume that human thought is really reporting on reality rather than participating in it. And this gives us the erroneous belief that we're objectively running thought. But in reality, thought is running us through a series of unconscious assumptions programmed into our memory by past experiences. So there's a basic disharmony that then results. And we become resistant to examining those assumptions. We really do. Which includes, of course, assumptions that include this thought-feeling process. We feel uncomfortable with something. And so we don't examine the thought process. We lack an understanding of our personal, our cultural conditioning. So we habitually project mental images on ourselves, on others, and the world. And I think the main reason for dialogue, the main purpose really, is to become conscious of the image maker and the image-making tendency. Thought has become so reflexive. We don't always realize our knee-jerk reaction, emotional reactions, imprinted on us by family and school and so on. And there's also language barriers. That is to say, not just different languages. Presumably, we all speak the same language. You understand me. I speak a brand of English known as American. You speak a brand of English known as Kiwi. So, but it's Old English, we say. And so, even within the same language, we give different meanings to the same terms. So we have to examine the assumptions that we have with regard to the terms. And therefore, there are different thinking patterns. We've grown up with different thinking patterns based on the meanings that we have learned to assign to different words. Now, one of the great problems in dialogue is that we lack interest in listening to each other. We're busy with the internal preparation of our own responses. But in genuine dialogue, there can be long silences. And you're not afraid of silence. Most of us are quite afraid of silence. We like to fill it up, or like the void. So, but if you're not really listening, then there's no need for silence. But if you really listen, you're not getting ready with your own response. You're listening. And when you have listened, then you can speak. And that's the essence of it. So that really, this is a kind of group verbal meditation dialogue. A group verbal meditation, where there's a relationship between thought and feeling and even expression in action. So I want to, after the break, when we come back, I don't think it matters if we have a break early, does it? Is that going to upset the whole? Good. Won't upset everybody. We can have a break 10 minutes early. All right. When we come back, I'm going to suggest this procedure. You will choose a partner. Is it all right, Doctor? Good, okay. So you will choose a partner. We'll all come back here together, but choose a partner that you're going to sit with so that there are just two of you. And I'm going to put a sentence on the board as the basis for the dialogue. And there will be 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, for you to talk to each other. Now, do not say, oh, I agree, or I disagree. There is neither agreement nor disagreement. You are examining what the statement is. You are examining what the assumptions are, what you assume it means. So one of you will perhaps start out by saying, well, it seems to mean this. The other may say, well, let's look at that. Let's look at that assumption. Because each word in the statement that I put up there is based on an assumption. So you will, for 10, 12 minutes, examine the statement. Doesn't matter whether you agree or don't agree. You are going to examine it. Is that clear? You're going to really try to get at the assumptions that are present. Then at that time, when I ring the bell, two people will join you. That is to say, each duad will now become a quartet. You will turn to two other people who have been discussing, and there will be four of you. You will have multiplied. There were now four of you. Two people that are probably fairly adjacent to you. And for another 10 or 12 minutes, you are going to now dialogue on the meaning of this. And perhaps the two that join you, the original two, will have seen other assumptions. So you will continue to look at that statement. You will continue to look at it and see what the four. Has something been changed? Have you discovered new assumptions, new meanings that weren't there when there were just two of you? It's very interesting to see what happens when four And so after about 10 or 12 minutes, I will again ring the bell, and I will put up another statement. And we will see then what the four of you come up with in dialogue. Is that clear? So there will be a statement on the board. You will have chosen a partner. You will dialogue together, seeking meaning, seeking assumptions, seeking meaning, probing into it, looking into it. I don't care whether you agree or don't agree. That is irrelevant in dialogue. Agreement and disagreement is absolutely irrelevant in dialogue. What is important is that you are inquiring. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because this is one mode of knowing, but also from the very inception of the Theosophical Society, it has been said, we are a body of inquirers. You ever heard that statement? And I think we have forgotten how to inquire. In fact, in the President Founder's inaugural address, Colonel Alcott, November 17, 1875, we inquire. We seek to prove nothing. We inquire. And that was the whole keynote. And in the Mahatma letters, which I always go back to, as you see, in the letter, it's either letter number 1 or letter number 2, so it's right early on, the adept, says the Master Cage, the adept is the rare efflorescence of a generation of inquirers. So, if we are interested in spiritual unfoldment, in treading the footsteps of those who are our elders, we better learn to inquire. A generation of inquirers, the rare efflorescence, the flowering, the beautiful flowering of a generation of those who are willing to inquire. And after all, the letters are all based on the fact that Mr. Sinnott and Mr. Hume were at least asking questions. So, first, there will be a pair of you. You will discuss, dialogue, assumptions, and meaning of the statement I have on the board. Then, after 10, 12 minutes, when I ring the bell, choose a pair so that there are 4 of you. You will continue looking at it, and then I will ring the bell again, and I'll give you another statement, which, as a foursome, you will examine. Is that clear? Everybody clear about it? All right. Well, it is time for the break.